So, hello and welcome everybody. Welcome to the flight DEV109 with the destination S/4HANA. So, my name is Marcel Hermanns, with me is Jens Weiler. Both of us are working on the topic programming model for quite a while. So, the first question comes up, what is a programming model? So, we understand under the term programming model all concepts, technologies and tools a developer has to touch in order to create an application. Or maybe you've seen the keynote session from Björn Görke, so we are going to a digital transformation, and in combination with S/4HANA that means that we want to create a lot of Fiori applications, and creating Fiori applications with new product qualities we want to achieve, the way how applications are built will change significantly, and therefore we are talking about a programming model. So the agenda for today is, first of all, we discuss why do we need a new programming model at all, what are the reasons for that. Then we'll see that we want to achieve new product qualities with the applications we want to create with our new programming model, and we will see the implications, the implications of the new requirements towards a client-server architecture, which we will discuss in detail, and how the new programming model has to support this architecture. And we will have this is on the critical part, 40 minutes, a live demo where we will build a complete Fiori application with draft support from the scratch. And yeah, at the end, if we come to that, depending on how many questions arise, so we will discuss the development flow more on a conceptual, from a conceptual side, and the involved artifacts that were created, and how the runtime stack looks like. So, why do we need a new programming model? If we discuss Fiori applications, a lot of buzzwords are going around, so like HANA, stateless, what about smart templates, Fiori elements and all that stuff. And what we are going to do today in these 2 hours is we will go in a structured way through this topic and start with the requirements which we want to discuss. The requirements are basically the qualities of the product, that means the applications we want to create for S/4HANA. Fiori applications. We can cluster them into 3 parts. First of all, of course, if we are discussing Fiori, we are discussing user experience. So user experience is the look and feel of an application. And if you compare that with this Venetian resort here, it looks like we are in Italy, but if you tap on the floor or knock on the door, it doesn't feel like being in Italy. And I don't know if you were in Venice, so the channels in Venice also smell a little bit different than the channels we have here in the Venetian resort. So obviously, unfortunately, we don't have to take care about the smell of SAP GUI transactions or Fiori applications, but we have to take care for the feel. So the feel of Fiori applications is they should be very simple to use, easy to use, and they should be role-based in order to support the end user in his role and in his activities. In addition, we want to support what we call draft qualities, because draft is a solution in order to fulfill these qualities, which are continuous work, device switch, and also collaboration between users. So scenarios or use cases for that are, maybe you want to start when you're going to the office in the morning in the bus, you say, well, I just want to enter the data already. I don't want to write it on a paper. I just want to enter the data that it is in the system. It is even not process relevant because I cannot complete my work, but I will do that in the office. But I just want to start entering this data on my mobile device and go ahead later in the office on your desktop. Or even a different person should go ahead. So you have a student in your company, the student should enter the data and you want to review it and activate it later on. Or even more complex scenarios. So this is what we understand under the term continuous work. It doesn't mean that you leave your PC and 2 hours later everything is gone because the SAP GUI session has a timeout. So that's not what we want to achieve, but we want to achieve that maybe you leave the office or you have to go to the office of your boss, and then 2 hours later you just can continue your work. And of course, what's also very important is to work effectively and efficiently with the entirety of the data which is in the system. So this is basically where HANA is supporting us a lot. But besides UX, we also have to take care for cloud qualities. And when I say cloud qualities, these qualities are not only applicable for the cloud, but also for on-premise scenarios, to improve the on-premise scenarios. to reduce TCO costs for operating the system. So this basically, the systems should scale better and should be available all the time, and we don't want to plan long downtimes for our systems. Totally different story, not TCO related that much, is extensibility. So in the cloud, we don't have access to ABAP backend tooling or something like that. As a user, especially as a key user, you might be a technical guy in your company that knows a little bit about programming, but not in detail. And as a key user, you might want to, for example, add a new field to your UI from the database table up to the UI in some minutes. So, and this is something which is very interesting for cloud scenarios, but also on-premise. So, last but not least, we don't want to invest everything completely new. We want to keep the ABAP assets, which we have out there since many years and which have been evolved over the last years. So like tracing, like performance analysis, all these tools, transportation management, the life cycle, we want to keep these assets. So now we will go a little bit into detail regarding these different qualities and see what the implications are. So basically, probably all of you know that, just as a motivation, because this has also impact on our programming model. With Fiori, the way how you create an application is a little bit different. So we don't start as an application developer creating a transaction and think about all the features this transaction has, and then the transaction gets bigger and bigger and gets more features, and we are happy about that. As more features the transaction has, as more confused are the end users, because not all features of this transaction are really consumed by an end user. So therefore, a good end user, an expert, is an expert if he knows which 90% of a transaction he should ignore. So therefore, it changes a little bit, because we do start with Fiori. So I'm a back-end guy, I'm a technical guy, I don't know that in detail. But as I heard, there are guys taking care for the design of applications. So you first analyze what should this application support, which activities are needed for a role. And then you build role-based applications. If we have multiple applications for various roles, it's quite obvious that these applications are also some kind of redundant, because they have to access the same data and partially also the same functionality. And whenever redundancy occurs, also inconsistency can occur. And therefore, it's a requirement towards our programming model to support the redundancy in building applications without having inconsistency. So, next one. So maybe you have seen that in the last years. Maybe you know the ALV on HANA. It's our more or less internal name. It's a ALV, ABAP Liswar, with integrated data access, and we also support that with the FPM and now also with the Fiori stack with an OData service to improve the way how we can do list reporting. So in former times, or probably still today, we start with a selection screen if we do list reporting. And a good end user knows which criteria he should enter so that the amount of data is not too big, that he can go ahead with his work and he does not have to wait several minutes and go to drink a coffee. So if the data is too much, we might have also a truncation of this data. So let's say we just want to read 500 records and not more. So that means we read the data from the database with the selection criteria. Then we have the data in ABAP. In ABAP, we perform normally the authorization check in order to restrict the data, what should be shown to the current user. And after doing that, we provide this internal table to the ALV, and then the ALV does the interaction based on this internal table. So this changes now completely with HANA, because we say we put all these different parameters, like the selection criteria you want to enter, if you need some, then the authorization check, the sorting, filtering, aggregation, grouping, and now also new features like text search and paging. We put all of them together into one SQL statement, and we read from the database just the data which is displayed on the UI. So that's much better, because we don't have to want to have a snapshot in ABAP for this internal table, but we just read the data which we need from the database and display it directly on the user interface. So, and obviously, This is something that you don't want to do in a manual programmatical way. So you don't want to create for an OData service or for different other user interfaces or protocols. You don't want to implement OpenSQL statements that have to be dynamically with order by, with the where clause, and then optional. You need different cases because if you write order by or not, that's different even for dynamic programming. So we want to intrinsically support that by our programming model, so to have the best possible performance we can achieve with HANA. So that was the read-only case. Read-only was mainly discussed last year, and this year we will focus on the even more interesting part, the transactional scenarios, even with this draft support. So now, this continuous work thing, the draft qualities, why do we need the draft at all? So typically we have one user working with one device, PC or even something else, and he's working with one ABAP session in the backend. And in the ABAP session, all the state lives. And if the session is gone, the state is gone. So and I cannot share my state with a different user, and I cannot use it on a different device, because the user is bound to the device, and the device is bound to the session, and the user is bound to the session. So this triple is fixed. So collaboration is not possible. I don't want to offer my ABAP session someone else, obviously, for security reasons, but I also cannot change the device, and I do not have a continuous work because of the timeout which occurs, which should also occur because we also have locks, and it's not possible to have a lock for several weeks, for example. We don't want to have that because then other users are also blocked. But now, with Fiori, we want to have it a little bit better. We want to say, yeah, collaboration is supported, and even I, as a single user, can use that on multiple devices, like I said, in the morning in the mobile, and afterwards in your office with the desktop or something else. And in order to support that, we need some kind of decoupling from the ABAP session. So the things which we entered, the state, whatever that means, we will also discuss this later, the state should not be bound to an ABAP session. We have to decouple that in order to achieve these qualities. And therefore, we need to avoid the server stickiness. That means get rid of the session coupling. So different requirement or different qualities we want to achieve, but same requirement for our architecture. Let's discuss how it is it handled in on-premise world. So in on-premise world, a company owns the system. So maybe if the company has different locations, it owns different systems for different locations. And if we want to upgrade or patch some fixes for this system, we can plan a downtime, maybe on the weekend when nobody is working. And the company can decide when to plan this downtime, and then everything is fine. But in a cloud world, obviously, we don't want to plan downtimes in order to fix some bugs or to get some new features. So we want to have nearly 100% availability of the system. So that's not possible to have downtimes. On the other hand, if a company is growing, we could also do some physical resource planning. And we can decide when do we want to add some more application server. So of course, we as a provider, we cannot say, well, maybe next week we get another application server or we want to change that. No, we want to dynamically change the resource assignment. And for both requirements, again, we need the decoupling from the applications towards the session. Because if the session would run, we could not change the application server or do an upgrade. We can just do that for each app server if we can say, well, there are no sessions running on this app server, and then we can do an upgrade. So this is not only helpful for us at SAP for the cloud scenario, but obviously also for customers who want to have the same features, the same availability, and the same business continuity. So again, we have to eliminate the server stickiness. So different story, and we will not go that much in detail for this because there are separate sessions regarding extensibility. With extensibility, like I said, we support different scenarios. So for example, if I want to create a new field for an SAP delivered application, either in the cloud but also on premise, I want to add a field that should be quite simple. I don't want to wait weeks until the field is there and pay a lot of money. I just want to have some guy with a little bit technical understanding, which we call key user or business user, and this key user should be able to add this field, maybe very simply via a Fiori application, extend the application with another field, and then we take care that the field is available on the database, that it is handled in the programming model, including the OData service, and it is automatically added to the user interface. There are also other scenarios like implementation of bodies, where you say, well, ABAP as a reporting language, that's also somehow understandable for simple scenarios like adding some numbers or something like that, that you can do that as a business user, as a key user. And therefore we also, for example, provide for key users as a Fiori application a restricted ABAP editor, so that you can do restricted ABAP, that means a limitation of the syntax we provide with ABAP within a Fiori application as a key user, without having additional ABAP tooling. So the only tool where we say we don't use Eclipse, because Eclipse is the way we go. So, different thing is then, okay, these various scenarios have to be supported not only at SAP, so also internally for industries and for globalization we need that, but also for customers and partners, obviously. And especially the key user scenario is very important for customers in the cloud, but can also be used on premise. Technically, of course, everything should be modification free. So we are talking about extensibility. Extensibility means we do not change the originals, obviously. So, key message here is, if we want to achieve that, also the programming model has to be prepared for extensibility. So we cannot create a new programming model and then, if it's done, we think, okay, what about extensibility and security and all that stuff? No, it has to be intrinsically supported. So we see that the different qualities that we can derive these requirements which we have here. So the look can be changed. This can also be changed for existing UI technology. Maybe you've heard of this visual harmonization, even for SAP GUI transactions, by changing the layout, maybe removing some fields and simplifying the UI. But as I said, the feel cannot be changed in that way. So therefore, our programming model has to support this redundancy in the applications coming from the role-based applications. We want to intrinsically support HANA performance and features. We need to offer extensibility, and as well for the cloud qualities, for TCO reasons, and also for the feel of the applications, we have to get rid of the session handling. However, that works. And then we want to keep the ABAP assets, like I said. We don't want to lose what we achieved in the last years. So, a different point of view is it to evaluate that under engineering aspects. So if we check this database, the application server, the ABAP, and the user interface, we can have a look on the power. So obviously the HANA database has a lot of resources and has a lot of power, so more than my mobile device, which I have in my pocket. On the other hand, the CPU costs on a mobile device as an end user on a desktop is much cheaper than on HANA. Not because my mobile device is cheap, but my mobile device is currently not used at all. So the CPU costs, there are no CPU costs by using this device then. And of course the network time is also low if I don't have to use network, because I can execute something on the client. So that means the power, most power is in HANA, but the CPU cost and the network time is very good on the client side. That means we have to check which things are we doing on which layer. So for example, if we want to get the count of all records where I have access to, we probably don't want to transfer 1 million data records from the database to the client in order to calculate the count on client side. So that's clear, we will do that on HANA side. But if we have a responsive UI and we want to calculate the distance between 2 pixels, we obviously also don't push the context of this application down to the database and calculate the distance there, but we do that on client side. And everything else, so these of course are 2 extreme examples, and everything else has to be done on the right layer, and we have to think about this one. Another dimension is the innovation. So Of course, HANA has a lot of innovation as a database, and this is typically an exception because the most innovation we have on client side, UI technology. UI technologies change quite often, so maybe in 10 years it's different than today, maybe then HTML5 is not used anymore, we don't know. So this has changed quite often, and we also know that UIs have to be adapted because the way how an application should look like also changes very fast. On the other hand, we cannot rebuild every application again and again every 10 years or 20 years. That's not possible. So therefore, we want to bring the timelessness to our business logic and to our data models. And of course, we need innovation on client side. Therefore, we need a decoupling of our data model, of our business logic, and some kind of semantics, a decoupling from the UI technology. And we will see later on that we also cannot only push down, or what means push down, that we do not only have the data model or the business logic, but also UI semantics in the back end. If I display a sales order, I probably know that the sales order ID should be the first column to be displayed. And this does not depend on the UI technology where I want to visualize it. It's something which is bound to the sales order itself. And therefore, I can store this information in the back end, and then each technology, UI technology, can take this information in order to display the data accordingly. So I don't want to implement that in JavaScript on client side for each new UI technology again, but I want to have this metadata available in the back end so that a client could evaluate that. So timelessness in the back end, innovation on the client side. So that means our feature list is a little bit extended. So of course we want to support HANA features and HANA performance, but we don't want to push all the code which we find in our system down to the database. So code push down doesn't mean that we push down all the code which we find. It just means push the code which you find and which is reasonable to be pushed down because it improves the performance and not slows down the performance. So therefore we exploit HANA features and performance where reasonable. And of course, we in the programming model have to support that because it's a difficult question. Then we do the right things on the right layer and this UI decoupling thing. So now if we say, okay, no session, what is this guide talking about? What is now happens to the state, and what is the state at all? And how does it work with our business logic in the ABAP? This is something which we will discuss now. Pretty clear is that we have an end user, that we have HANA as a database, that we are having some client, some device, and the application, which is communicating with the ABAP backend. And we are communicating in a RESTful way. That means that between two round trips to the backend, we don't have resource consumption in the backend server. Because if we would use thousands of mobile devices, because now more users are using an S4 HANA system, and many of them are using mobile devices, we cannot have an ABAP session where we have resource consumption always, all the time. So we just want to have that between the round trips. And therefore, we are using REST as the way of a protocol which we want to use. And OData is a semantical protocol using REST. So, and with that one, we achieve the three things. We avoid the server stickiness, we keep our ABAP platform assets, and we are using HANA features on a high-level picture. So, but what is now the impact with regards to the state? On a typical application, this is basically the picture we already have seen. We know that we cannot support collaboration, we cannot support the device switch because of the coupling towards the ABAP session. And in the ABAP session, the state lives, and or also the business logic is executed. When we get a timeout, then the state is gone. It's not accessible anymore. This is the way how classic applications work. If you want to have now a stateless backend, stateless is not the right term because we are not stateless. We just do not have a session in the meanwhile, but of course we have a state. So what we can do is we could use an approach which many customers are also using because the one or two transactions might not be that usable because we freeze the complete screen if you enter something that is not valid, and it takes a lot of time, and we have the timeout. Many end users are using Excel or some list or something else where you enter the data and perform a batch input afterwards, and in order to bring the data into the backend. We could use the same approach here, not by using something else where we enter the data, but by using a Fiori application. We could enter the data on the client side, and then if I press save, the data is transferred into the backend. That's quite simple. Maybe that works also for simple applications, but I don't get feedback to what I have entered, because I just get feedback when I press save, because only then the data is transferred to the backend. So that's not very good, and also we do not achieve the qualities we discussed. So therefore, we need something better, and we can do so. What we want to have is multiple users in a collaborative way. It's an option, can use with multiple devices with the content which was created. And therefore, we have decided to persist the state, whatever that means, persist the state in the database. That means we persist the state, that means data, for example, that was entered in the database, and when we store it in the database, it's not bound to the session anymore. And then we can use that on different devices and also for different users, if we enable that. The business logic is still in the ABAP backend, and we persist the state in the database level so that the business logic can read the state quite fast. So we cannot persist the state somewhere in the cloud, because that would take too much time. We also cannot persist it on the application server, because we want to get rid of the server stickiness, so we cannot shut down the server if the state is persisted on the app server, so we have to do it on the database. That's the only place where we can go. So now the question comes up. We can support all these qualities, but the question comes up: what is the state actually? So we had discussions like days, weeks, or even months. What is the state, and how can we go ahead with that one? So we separate the technical state, which is, well, let's say log-on data authentication, connections. We don't take care for that. That's already done. We take care for our business state, for the semantical state. And we distinguish between the essential state and the inessential state. The essential state is something which we need in order to run our application in a consistent way. If this state would be gone, we are in trouble. Yeah? Then the consistency of the data is not given anymore. So we have three categories. First of all, it's the data which was entered or changed on the client. So we've written original data modification, but it's of course not only the modification, also the creation of data. First of all, that's quite obvious. Second thing is, well, not only the data which is entered is the state which we have in the backend, but we also might need some interaction data. Was this error message shown on the UI at all? And the error message might even itself. And of course, logs. So we don't have a session anymore. How can we create logs, pessimistic logs with an enqueue server? So that's a good question, where we come later to. So these three things: data which was changed, some interaction data, and the logs. Inessential state, on the other hand, where the application has to take care for that, also currently, is, well, data that we read via a function module or somewhere else from the database directly in order to, for example, validate the data which was entered. So we create caches, some internal tables where we read the data in order to do something with that, to calculate something or whatever. This state could be resumed in each round trip. So it might not be good from a performance point of view, but from a functional point of view, it's no problem, because in each new round trip, you could read the data again. Of course, this is probably not reasonable, so we could use shared memory or whatever, or the soft state where we come later on in order to improve the performance here. The business logic. Now we understood what the state basically means. We know that the state should be persisted, the essential state should be persisted, should be independent of the session. But what about the business logic? As I said, with this batch input approach, the business logic in the backend is triggered when I press save, or if I say create leave request. I enter data, I press the button create leave request, and for this scenario, this batch input approach is even sufficient for create leave request application. Because then the business logic in the backend runs, and I get the feedback which I want to have for my application, and the data is persisted. So, but for more complex applications where I have maybe 5 tabs and I want to enter data in 40 fields, I don't want to get the feedback when I press save that the first value which I have entered was not consistent, was not valid. I want to get it immediately. Therefore, on our interactive transactional application, for more complex transactional applications, for draft applications, we do it in a different way. We have the perceived transaction again. I did not introduce that, sorry. The perceived transaction is the transaction which is felt by an end user. That means I open an application, press on edit, until I press save. So this is a perceived transaction. It's not a technical transaction, because currently we don't have a transaction really anymore. It's the perceived transaction from the end user. So the phase where I'm editing something. And now we do not persist that at the very end when I press the save button. No, we do that in the meanwhile, for example, for each section on a UI. Whenever I leave a field or the section with some fields, whenever I leave these fields as an end user, we send a request to the back end in order to save this data. And we have to save the data, of course, not in the original database table, because then we would save incomplete or inconsistent data, but we have to save it somewhere else. And with each round trip where the data is saved, we could then also execute the business logic in the back end in order to get feedback. That means get error messages, get new calculations based on the data, derived data, and so on. So that means the impact for the end user here is that we get the feedback immediately, and then we have also this data loss prevention, continuous work thing, and the device switch, and so on. The impact on the programming model is that we somehow have to support this storage of this data which was entered, and also the interaction data. And therefore we introduce the draft, and the draft is basically a shadow table of the original data. And in this draft table we persist the data. And of course we have also to support the activation of this draft data when I press save at the end of the day. So when I press save and we are in a consistent state, the draft will be transferred into the original database table as it was done before. So now the not so simple topic, logs. Logs are currently in the classic ERP application done like that. We go into the edit mode, logs are created, logs live together with the session, or whenever I press save, the logs are removed. And when the session has gone, then also the logs are gone. But in the new world, it's a little bit different. For the batch input application, we don't have any kind of session or something in the backend at all. We just have it on the client side, as I said. Create leave request, you enter some values, press save, then you're done. That means if I edit something, we cannot have some exclusive logs in this meanwhile. It also doesn't make sense for this kind of application. But we can have optimistic logs. That means timestamp comparison via eTag, for example. And at the end, when I press save, then obviously the ABAP session is created in order to update the database tables. And of course, during this time, we first have to create a pessimistic log for resources that are changed, and then we can check, do the timestamp comparison that really nothing changed in the meanwhile. Yeah? Otherwise, it would be inconsistent. And then we can perform the changes, and then we are done. So, but for real transactional application, where I have to have exclusive logs in order to work properly, we need exclusive logs. And here, during my perceived transaction, from edit until save, we have several requests, as we just saw. So in order to update the deltas. And during this phase, I obviously want to have, as an option of course, exclusive logs, so that my data is protected and nobody else can change it in the meanwhile, because it might take a while until I'm done. So then, if I would stop working on with my application for whatever reason, because I'm done in the bus, I need half an hour until I get into the office, and then I go ahead, then of course we cannot exclusively log all the data which is required. Or if I go on vacation for 1 or let's say 2 weeks, I cannot log all the data which is required. Therefore, we also have a timeout now for the logs. And the logs, we call them also durable logs, because they live longer than the ABAP session, which is just used for this request round trip here. For these exclusive logs, we call them durable logs. They are also used for via the enqueue server, and they are not bound to a session anymore, but to the data which was entered. And if the timeout occurs now, then we are in an optimistic log phase again. So that means if I'm on vacation for 2 weeks and I come back, maybe I have simply forgotten to activate that, and if the data did not change in the meanwhile, I could even go ahead with editing this data and can activate that. And if someone else has changed it in the meanwhile, I cannot proceed because then the optimistic log says, well, declined because you are outdated. So, and with this concept here, that means the state, the draft on the database in the database table persisted, and with the logs bound to the data but not to the sessions, we can achieve now all the qualities which we want to achieve. The ABAP session lives only during the request response round trip, during the cycle, or I could decide for performance reasons that the session should be reused between several round trips, but just as a performance improvement via the gateway soft state, just as a performance improvement. So this was about the state, the client-server architecture, what should be covered by our programming model with regards to the state, business logic, and logs. Do you have any questions so far? Yes, please. Sorry?
Does the optimistic log stay active after downtime is complete?
The optimistic log, of course, is, for example, the persisted timestamp within my data, and this is really independent of the downtime, of course, yes. Yeah, good question. Another question? Okay. So then we will check a little bit how the new programming model looks like, and then we will have a 40 minutes demo by creating a complete application end-to-end. Discussing this programming model. So as I said, all concepts, technologies, and tools that you have to use as an application developer in order to create an application. So in the ABAP world, we have quite a lot of different programming models. So we have different UI technology, and each UI technology comes with a new programming model. But that's not the only one. We also have, for example, enterprise search. Enterprise search, where the data is replicated into a different database, in a memory T-Rex database, where we can execute, for example, search features. So here we have a different design time. We even might have different user experience because a different UI technology might be used. And with the BW, it's quite the same. We replicate aggregated data into the BW database, and then we can perform analytical requests based on that. And we have a dashboard or applications on top. But now with HANA everything gets better. We have a single database where we can do OLTP and OLAP accesses. So we just have one database and everything is in there. Based on that, we can now introduce a single, common data modeling technology, which is the core data services, CDS. And with CDS, we have one data modeling technology where we can define models for analytical, transactional, and search requests. There's one technology in order to create the data models for that. And then on top of this single data modeling technology, we can also come up with one programming model for all of these flavors. So bad thing is, we need a new programming model. Good thing is, we just have one. And if we just have one programming model, then we can also have one UX experience, one UI experience. And with this UI experience, we can also say within one application, we cannot only have list reporting like in the ALV, but we could also have search capabilities because HANA offers a fuzzy search, so error-tolerant search. We can have the list reporting, the search, and even aggregation and grouping or a chart or whatever within one user interface based on one OData service because we can implement that in our common programming model. So that's the plan. And this is the solution. We have here the end-to-end stack, and we are using SAP UI5, of course, as a client technology, And with UI5, you have the option to implement freestyle applications, however you want that, integrate different things. But in order to speed up development, we need also something on top, which is pattern-based. And this is Fiori Elements. And Fiori Elements is the combination of smart controls. That means I have a smart filter bar, which is basically a selection screen, directly reflecting what is defined in my OData service, and also other controls. Or we could even use smart template. Smart templates are also pattern-based, but complete user interfaces. Not only controls, but a complete user interface. So this is a default. So we have an open architecture. We could also decide to go for a different UI technology or the customer, but because we are open with OData, however, we decide to use UI5, of course, as the default. We have Gateway as the OData infrastructure. In ABAP, you might have seen that in different sessions. In other sessions, we have a lot of new new syntax capabilities, new features which are there, and we are using Eclipse, which with a rich feature design time. And then we need to handle somehow the transactional stuff. So in former times, for example, in SAP GUI, I think everyone did that. We implemented PBO and PII modules and implemented the business logic inside of these modules. And then the business logic is coupled towards SAP GUI because it's just part of this programming model. What we need to do is to decouple the business logic, as I said, in order to get this timelessness of the business logic. And therefore, we are using here BOPF, the Business Object Processing Framework, which defines a way how we can modularize our business logic into validations, for example, side effect-free business logic to get error messages, into determinations to calculate something, and into actions, some named functionality. And with this BOPF framework, we get like LUW support for free. Yeah, so the database handling is done automatically. We get authorization checks for free, and also what we will see, the draft handling, for example. So besides the transactional stuff, we will use CDS. CDS has two jobs. First of all, it's about data modeling, as I said. Second thing is creating data, the artifacts on the database level, like SQL views, and maybe in the future also tables and stuff like that. And of course, you can also use breakouts with the ABAP managed database procedures. That means SQL script implemented logic on HANA. So now the tricky part comes, the demo. So, and now we start with an application. Maybe you also had a flight to Las Vegas for this TechEd, and I was not really happy about the flight meal which I got. So maybe we can create a flight meal manager application in order to change the flight meal assignment for the second flight. Therefore, we have prepared a database table which is that flight meal assignment. And in order to create now this application, we need to do the modeling in CDS. So let's start with the CDS artifact. We are now in ABAP in Eclipse as a backend developer, and I create a data definition script. And I call this one flight meal assignment 19. Flight meal assignment. So we're creating the CDS artifact. So that worked. And now hopefully you also can see it in the last rows. You can see that? Okay. So what is important here is especially the highlighted line. We define a new view, and I'm always looking forward for good names. So it's Las Vegas flight meal assignment 19. This is a new view as a select from a database table. And now we are using our database table, which is that flight meal assignment. And if we check what is in there with F2, I can see the columns of this database table, which is a technical key, which is good. Technical keys are good, GUIDs, separated from the business data. Then we have the carrier, we have the connection ID, the meal, and then we have aggregated seeds. So what was it again, Jens? I think it was the number of meals for this assignment in the last month.
Month.
Right. However,
Don't surprise me like that.
And then we have a status, the release status. Is the assignment released? So, and now, that was the wrong table, by the way. This one. Now we get the columns of this table into our view. We just insert all elements. But first of all, I offer here a good alias, and we insert all elements. The mandity field is not required. The primary key is the DB key, which I say it's the key here. So now, since we are generating database artifacts, we have to offer a DEDIC name for the generated SQL view in DEDIC. And therefore, I take a similar name. It has to be shorter. I call it like that. And now I can activate this view. So view is activated. I could even execute it with F8. And I can see that the data which is available here. But of course, we don't want to work as an end user with Eclipse. We want a nice Fiori application, so we have to do something in addition. So first of all, CDS was introduced after HANA was invented in the ABAP world in order to improve the status quo. Because if you are creating HANA views, which is really cool because you can do a lot of stuff there, if you introduce HANA views, you have to transport them somehow, you have to include them into the ABAP world with a proxy, with an external view, which we have called it, but that doesn't feel really like ABAP development. Therefore, we decided to improve the view capabilities the ABAP supports with SE11, where you can just, for example, have some inner joins to improve this view capabilities. And therefore, we introduced CDS, first of all, for SQL views with a rich feature set. Yeah? So we can have left-outer joins, we can have inner joins, we can have unions, where clause, order by, we can do all that stuff. Even aggregation and grouping we can do here. But second cool thing is that we can add associations here. So maybe you know about entity relationship diagrams or UML diagrams. We always have entities and we have relationships between entities. And these relationships are named conditions, named join conditions. And these associations are also introduced in CDS. So I can use here some associations, like association to the carrier, ZI carrier, as underscore carrier on, and now comes the join condition, carrier ID equals carrier. So this association is a one-to-one association, and I need two more of them for the connection and for the flight, for the meal, sorry. So for the connection, I do pretty much the same. I call it connection, and it also has in the join condition the carrier ID. But in addition, it has the connection ID. Connection ID equals connection ID. There we go. So third association, we go to the meal. Call the association underscore meal. And the join condition is a little bit different. We have the meal identifier, which is meal equals meal ID. So now I can press pretty printing. Now it's formatted well. So we can see that we have great tool support here for the syntax with auto-completion and pretty printing. We get some warnings here. Why? We see that the association, so however it is written in German, I don't know, the association is not used at all. So what we want to do is we want to expose this association to the UI, that the UI can navigate on this on these associations. Therefore, we also have to mention it in the projection. So this is the select clause, a projection of my view, and I do not only have to to add the columns which have to be exposed, but also the associations that should be exposed, because I could use the associations also internally. So I expose the association. I forgot a column here. So, and we expose the meal, we expose the connection, and we expose the carrier. So, cool. Now we have a CDS view, we have associations, that means we have a data model. And every time we have a data model, we do that for a specific reason. Because if we have a data model, we can evaluate the metadata. And that's good because if we have a smart client, the smart client can evaluate this metadata in order to display, to render the data accordingly. So this is basically very similar to the ALV, to the ABAP list viewer, which you might know. Because if we have some information in the DEDIC, the ALV knows about that and uses information like value helps, like UI text and so on. It uses this information automatically. And this is also done here in this stack with CDS and the metadata which is there, and a smart client, a smart template-based application or smart control-based application. So therefore we have this model now available, even with associations. But how can we now access the data from this view in the backend? We need an OData service, since we are talking about Fiori. So let's create an OData service. Maybe who of you knows the Gateway Service Builder? Or has even used it? Okay. So the Gateway Service Builder is a tool where you can create OData services. Now you can think, is this very productive in implementing an OData service? What about implementing an OData service with sorting, filtering, text search, and all that stuff manually? Well, I would not go for this approach because this takes a lot of time and is we might end up in several errors and mistakes which you can do, so at least I'm not would not be able to do that in a perfect way. So therefore we say we offer a default implementation for these scenarios, and this is done via our programming model, and we can simply add here an annotation which is called OData publish true. So this annotation creates now an OData service which is fully implemented for the CDS view and the associations, with the full runtime support for ordering, for the sorting, for filtering, navigation along these associations to the other entity sets, and all that stuff. We could even add search, whatever we want here. So, but the client, if it needs to be smart, a smart client can only be smart if it has additional information. So now the third cool thing about CDS comes. We have not only the data model with the associations, we also have annotations, not only the ones we can see here, but also annotations for the client. Yeah? In last year, we got the feedback, well, the UI annotations isn't that part of the model view, the view part of the model view controller approach. Why is it now stored in the backend at all? So as I introduced it with this timelessness, we need to have it in the backend because it's independent of the UI technology. It's semantic. It's controller, UI controller semantic, and we bring it persisted in the backend. But we don't want to persist it in CDS view because then we always have to activate it on DEDIC level just because we added some UI-related annotations. Therefore, we introduce now the metadata extensions, which is a separate artifact. And currently, we have a syntax editing of this metadata extensions. Of course, you can think about an advanced tooling later on, but our strategy is first to come up with a clear syntax for something, and then we can build additional tooling on top later on. So therefore, I need here the annotation metadata extension allowed. So now I can activate that one. For the metadata extensions, I have already prepared a script which is in this package. So we see the metadata extension UI semantics. So we have the number 19. We see that we can define these UI annotations even in a layering concept. So we can say, well, we are creating a core application at SAP, so we define the layer to be the core layer. But we could also say, well, I'm now a partner, and I create this metadata extension on partner level or even on customer level, and then we can find out how to merge the different UI annotations which we have. Because the customer might decide, want to decide that it looks a little bit different. The button is not on the left side, but on the right-hand side. So therefore, we can override these annotations in addition. So we see some header information. Okay, it's a flight meal and also the plural name. And here now the important stuff is we annotate a view which is called flight meal assign 19. And we can see here the list of the elements which we have. And because our database key is a GUID, we don't want to show that on a user interface. And this is also pretty clear that this information is independent of the UI technology which we are using. I don't want to show a GUID to the end user, therefore I hide this field. And then we have information for carrier, connection ID, and so on, that it shall be displayed on the selection screen, it should be displayed in the table, and it should be displayed in the details part of the application. Now we can find several annotations here, and I think we have to get rid of this one here. Actions, we don't have a clue about that, so we remove it. We will see later what that means. So, now going back to the CDS view, unfortunately, we can see here that we have an error. This is because this OData service has to be regenerated. I would say that's a bug. So we have to activate this CDS view again so that we can get our annotation file for the UI annotations. Well, now we do have an OData service available. We could open it. And we get our metadata. We can even check the metadata file where we can see, yep, we have the carrier, we have the connection, with our flight meal assignment. There we go with the flight meal assignment. We see that we have the DB key as a key, and we can see all our properties. So, but executing OData services via URI parameters does not make so much fun. So therefore we go into the web IDE and create now a Fiori application on top. That means I'm now in the role of a UI developer using the web IDE, which is a tool deployed in the cloud in our HCP in order to create an UI on top of my backend service. So what we can do here is we can say File, New, and then we create a project from a template. And of course, we are using a smart client, a smart template application, because I'm not so good in JavaScript programming. I get it for free. I say I have a project which is called Flight Meal Assignment 19. And then we have something mandatory.
Screen resolution.
Yeah, screen resolution isn't. I think this one here. The TechEd component, and now we have to select the backend system. So this is now the gateway service catalog visualization. In the service catalog, we have to select our backend system, which is TechEd DEV109 version 4. And then we can select the OData service, which we need. And the OData service is called exactly as we named the CDS view with _CDS. So per default, the gateway services from Service Builder are called like the gateway project with _SRV, like service, and we generate a name which is automatically derived from the CDS view name. So it's called ZI_Las Vegas Flight Meal Assignment 19. There we go. Now here we can see even what also we saw in the XML, the different entity sets which we have. And this is now the canonical representation of my CDS model in OData. So I don't have to create any kind of OData model in the backend and assign some model to that. It's just that the CDS model is the OData model, is the UI model. And now I can press next. Hopefully, yes, we get the annotation file. This is the annotation file containing the UI annotations, and was the reason why I had to reactivate the CDS view. So next, the OData collection, flight meal assignment, and now we press finish. And now the JavaScript project is generated in my web IDE locally. And I can execute this one now. I press the Run button on the generated project. And I don't want to use a mock server. I could also use a mock server here if I want to have some mocked data, but since we have already a working OData service, we take the normal connection. And now, in this web IDE deployed in the cloud, we have some creation or internal creation of a Fiori Launchpad where we can start our application. This takes quite a while because of the authentication and creating this virtual thing. And now we can start this application. I have to enter my password again. And hopefully, yes, the application is rendered accordingly. So you might remember that we had the airline and the connection as the selection fields, so they are displayed here in my smart filter bar. So this is the selection screen basically. And here we have the table with the columns which we selected as line items. And of course I can now execute this one and I get all the data which we also saw on the back end. And I could use the settings dialog, could say which columns to be displayed, could define some order by rules, or sort rules, or aggregation and grouping. Now I want to work with this data, so I want to filter on this data. So, but if I check this value help, I can see that there is no real value help. I can simply enter some value here, and I could also do it like that. So I would like to have some value helps here to help the selection of the filters. In addition, it's quite boring just to see the data in a read-only mode. So we have the list and the details page. I also want to change the data. So if we go back, we want to have the value help, and we also want to have transaction support for this application. So 2 jobs we have to do as a backend developer. So going back to ABAP in Eclipse. So first of all, the value help. We know that the carrier, the connection ID, and the meal are foreign keys of the real data. So what we can do here is we can annotate them, that means enrich the metadata, via the object model foreign key annotation. And because we know that a foreign key means that the target of the association which is used contains all the values, we could use these values for the value help. So we enter here the name of the association for the foreign key target. We do so for the carrier, for the connection ID, and also for the meal. And since only value help is quite boring, we could also say we want to have some search feature. Like I said, transactional, list reporting, search, and also analytics is supported in this programming model. So I could say this view is also searchable. And in order to define which columns are searchable, I can define some elements as default search elements. So these are the columns to be searched on. I could enter also now some fuzziness threshold, but we just keep it like that. So we have the value help, we have the search. Now we want to have transactional support. Let's start with the batch input application. So simple create, update, delete support. Maybe we, first of all, do not support the delete because we just want to see how it works. So here we have to add now a couple of annotations again, which is in the object model namespace. And we add, for example, the annotation of the model category. We say that this one here is a business object. A business object is conceptually a data model, a tree, a composition tree, might have also other associations, but a composition tree, and besides the data model, also business logic is attached to the different nodes of this tree. And therefore we define this one here as a business object. It's a simple business object because it just has one node. But for example, if we see the product which is created in S4HANA, we see that it has, for example, 29 nodes. So business objects can also become bigger. So, but what we have to do is we have to say that this one here is a root entity. And we want to have some transactional enabling here. Which transactional enabling? We want to support the create, we want to support the update, and we don't want to support the delete. I will add it later and comment it out for now. And since this business object has to work with the database table, so in order to update and read and create the data, we have to add the name of the database table here, which is the write active persistence. So currently we are not so clever to find out that this table is already the table where the data has to be written. Therefore we have to mention it here again. Flight meal assignment. So, and now we can activate that one. And since the smart template, that was too fast. Because the name is wrong. We can activate that one. And because we are activating now backend resources, the timestamp changes from the data model we created. So the CDS or the depicts timestamp has changed. And gateway caches the metadata of a service with $metadata, and this cache is now invalidated because we changed something in the backend. So we inform gateway that the CDS view has changed, gateway can invalidate the metadata cache, and we can recreate this invalidated metadata cache. And now the client, when it reads the next time $metadata, it sees also that this has been changed and invalidates the local browser cache for the metadata. Therefore, if I press now F5, then the smart template is so smart to read it again and to change the rendering of the UI accordingly. So we added the value help, we added the search feature, and we added the CRUD support. So we can see it here. We have a search, in-app search support here. We have the value help, where we get the values. And we can see that we have a plus button here. We can create new data. We don't have a delete button because I did not say that it should be delete enabled, and per default it's disabled. And we can enter new data now. So cool. For example, the Lufthansa flight 400 with the meal number 2. And now we can see strange, okay, the number of seats is something that I would like to calculate, so it should not be an input value, it should be read-only and be derived automatically in the backend. And we also can see an input field for the status. Well, the release status, I simply want to have a button or an action here on the UI in order to release the data. It should also be read-only. So let's do these two things. Calculate the number of seats and add an action for the status. You can see the data is persisted here. Where's my record? Here. And now we want to have that one. So a release button and calculation of the number of seats. So we go to the backend, and we can see that with our annotations which we added, a new icon was created because something was generated. And what was generated is now our BOPF business object, the Business Object Processing Framework. And if I click on that, I automatically come to my business object. I also can do that, of course, in my Project Explorer, and we have here a very nice outline where we can add several things. So BOPF was originally not designed for this end-to-end stack, so we were not able to invent everything completely new, but we are using existing technology, proven technologies, and BOPF, which is also part of the NetWeaver since quite a while, was used in order to create a complete backend application where you define the data model with the nodes, the associations, and then implement that stuff. But now with CDS is our data modeling tool or technology, and BOPF is now used as a container for our business logic and for doing and for doing all that magic in a transactional world. And here I can now say, so we see here the name of the business object and the name of the root node. Both names are basically the CDS view names. I can add here now a determination. So let's start with that one. We want to count the seats. So, and I prepared a class for that one, which is called FMA something, count determination. And this determination is triggered after I modified something, whatever I modified. So, and it's used in a create and also in an update. Okay? So I have to check this one here. Let's go to the class. So the nice class editor in ABAP and Eclipse. And we can see here that this class is derived from a generic class from BOPF, and I have to implement an execute method. That means whenever this business logic is triggered, and when it is triggered I just configure it in case of a modification for a create or an update, then BOPF takes care that this determination is called. So I have now a very nice container for my business logic, which is now really independent on the consumption. So here I don't care about OData, I don't care about UI5, I just implement my business logic, which has side effects. It's a determination. So, and what can I do here? I can say, okay, I read some data, I loop over the data, do the magic with the month to aggregate it, and then I persist the data. So the example we have chosen is maybe not the best one, because normally you would calculate that on the fly on database level, the aggregation, but just an example, we want to persist it here in this case. And then we replace the 18 with the 19, and we activate this class. Now we have the determination being implemented. Second thing we wanted to have is we wanted to have another action. Not another one, but the first one. So therefore, I can go again to the outline of my business object, and I say add action. The name of the action should be release. And for that one, I also prepared an implementation class, which is called FMA something release action. Then we want to execute that on a single node instance. The class already exists, yes. And we have to define the export type of this action. So BOPF supports here several scenarios. You could return in an action a complex type or whatever you want, or even a table, but currently in our programming model end-to-end, we support the most important one, which is a bound action. That means the action returns the record where you have changed the data. And here we want to release a flight meal assignment, therefore the action returns the instance which was changed, that means the flight meal assignment. Therefore we say the exporting type is the node, and the business object is this one, and the node has the same name. And the export multiplicity is 1, we just return 1 record. So now we could also check the business logic again. I activate the BO in the meanwhile. We go to the business logic, and we can see here that we have similar structure of this class. So we derive from a generic class and we implement an execute method. That means the execute method, which is called when I press release in the UI. And we again change the name here from 18 to 19. And we can see what is done here in this business logic is, well, some retrieve again, data retrieval, and we see that the status is changed to true, and then it's updated in the BOPF buffer. And BOPF takes then care that the data is written to the database accordingly with all details we have to take care of. So I activate this class as well, back in the UI. I hope that due to the fact that we are stateless, everything works now automatically, so we haven't touched any well, we have touched the metadata, we added a function, so we need to press F5. When the metadata changed, the UI has to reread the metadata, therefore we have to refresh.
Read only.
Thank you. Same mistake as in the last presentation. I missed the annotation read only. And I also want to delete it, enable it now. So, because the status and the number of seats is derived automatically, or is handled by this action, we set these fields to read only. So another annotation for that. Activate again. Oh. So a blue screen. Surprise, surprise. Does it work? Does it work? Ah, because, yes, I was already on the detail page. I missed it. Let's start it again.
Und durch die Metadata Annotation Änderungen durch den Core View aktivieren.
Yes, another issue. I missed to add the metadata extension. Thanks, Jens. In my metadata extension, I have to add also the action, because now a business object can have several actions. Yeah? So, for example, if I have a sales order with 20 actions and I want to create a role-based application, not all actions shall be available on the UI because then it's too complex. I just want to have maybe 2 or 3 of those actions. Therefore, I define in my UI annotations which of these actions shall be visible on the UI via this annotation. So, there we go. We don't see the release action here, but maybe we first check that I cannot enter the data. Yes, it's read-only. And if I enter something here, LH 402, and I press save, then we can see that the number of seats is automatically derived. That means we have now a working batch input application. I can enter the data, I don't get any feedback, but when I press save, the data is transferred with $batch into the backend, it's written on the database, and the business logic which I have implemented is executed. So that works already. The release we will see then in the next refresh. I don't want to wait another time for the refresh. But we can see that I have created inconsistent data, because we can see that we have for this flight with this connection number 2 times the same meal number. So obviously this is not consistent. So how can we improve that one? That I cannot create this inconsistent values here. And in addition, I could enter here whatever I want. So also that one should probably not be possible. Okay? Therefore, 2 things. I want to ensure that the alternative key, which is airline, connection, flight meal, is unique. And I want to ensure that the entered values are real foreign key values, so they should exist. So therefore, I can go now to BOP again, and I can, so where's my business object? There we go. And I can add here now a semantic key, an alternative key. Add an alternative key, where the name is semantic key. And it should be unique if the attributes are not initial. It should be checked after each modification. And I want to add the list of the fields here, which are my 3 foreign keys. So, and another thing is, I want to implement a validation that the entered values really exist. Therefore, I can add now a validation. Like I said, BOP distinguishes 3 different code flavors. One is the determination to calculate something. It has side effects. It changes data. therefore it's called determination. Another one is validation. A validation does not have any kind of side effects, it just validates data. So, and for us, within the programming model, it's also very important to distinguish that one, because we always know that calling a validation does not change data. So we can also execute that on read-only scenarios, okay? So determinations change data, validations not. And actions are named business logic. So we add validation here to check the foreign keys. I also prepared a class here, which is called check foreign keys. So, and now we have to configure that correctly. This should be called before we execute the save. In case of create, an update, or a check is called. So, and then we go again to our business logic. Meanwhile, I refresh the UI. And within our business logic, we again change 18 to 19. And we can see what's done here. We can see that basically data is read from the carrier, database, table, connection, and meal, and that we check that the carrier of the entered data exists, and if it does not exist, we raise a message, wrong carrier. Okay? So we added now this semantic key. It should ensure that the data we entered is unique, and we have we check the foreign keys that the data which we entered exists. Now, if I go to my UI, I can enter data. Let's do what I've done now several times. LH402. I press save. And we see instance with the same key already exists. So BOPF takes now care that this is executed. So I don't have to implement anything for that. BOPF takes care that the key is unique. So another one. I had some data which is invalid. And if I press save now, we can see that no data is found. Okay. So I missed something. Again, we have to change the behavior of our messages, because messages have to be handled differently in a batch input application and in a draft application. Because in a batch input application, we do not have a state in the backend except the data which we saved. So the message which comes up is transient. In case of a draft scenario, the state is available in the database, and also the messages are persisted so that we don't have to call the business logic again and again if the data has not been changed. Therefore, we say the lifetime within our batch input application is not state, but is transition. So we replace also that one. 3 replaces, yes. We activate again. And now it hopefully behaves differently. We get the right error messages. Wrong carrier, wrong connection, wrong meal. So I can change that one. And if I enter something correct, then I'm able to persist it. And we can see, due to our refresh, that also now the release button is available. And if I press release, status is changed accordingly. So now we have a simple, but we have a batch input application. So I'm not happy with that one, because the error messages I just get when I press save. So if I have now a very huge screen, I have to enter a lot of data, I'm very unhappy if after 2 hours of work I get the error message related to the first field, which I have entered wrong. Therefore, we will create now a draft application out of that. Funny thing is that this draft enablement is now the simplest part, because I just have to add, just guess, exactly an annotation. I have to add an annotation which says it's not only create, update, delete enabled, but it's also draft enabled. And as I said, the draft is persisted in a shadow table, so all you have to do is to tell us what should be the name of this table, and then we take care of the creation, we take care of an update, metadata update of this schema update of this table whenever the CDS view here changes. And we also take care that the extension fields, which are part of this view here, are also taken over in the draft table. So we take care for all of that. We are also not able to change this table because we add the editor flag in the DEDIC artifact. So let's add a name here, write draft positions. And we call it, similar to the SQL view, 19 draft. We activate that, and we can see that the database table is hopefully created correctly. This is our latest development. Yes, we can see here that a draft table was generated. Seems that a link is missing, however we get some information about that. Cool, that was simple. Something that we have to add here also is, like I said, the message handling is a little bit different between the batch input application and the draft application. We have to rechange the lifetime flag here. So this is also something which we might simplify because this is a tricky one. It's not transition, but it's state. We want to persist this message. I can press F3 to activate that. And now back in my UI. Jens, did I miss something? Hopefully not.
From the perspective, I've seen it now.
So I open two browsers. I copy this one. So typically this would be now the moment that something goes wrong. As I said, when the metadata changes, and of course the metadata changes here very, very significantly because we have now a draft enabling. And this draft enabling requires a change of the orchestration we do via OData. So because we have to know, is it active, is it draft, which user has changed this data, when, so administrative data, is a log set for this record, and so on and so on. And this is all done automatically. You don't have to take care for that. We add this in our programming model. Therefore, good idea to use a programming model. So we can see that it works here on the left-hand side, and we can see that it does not work on the right-hand side. Just press start. So I press refresh. Otherwise, we just work with one browser. So what we can see here is that we can select via the editing status. So I can select all the data. I can select my own drafts. I could select data which is currently being locked by someone else. I could display unsaved changes by another user. You might have in mind the slide with this lock phases, and whenever I stopped working and the timeout passed by and our garbage collectors deleted the logs, then we are in this optimistic lock phase, and this means we have unsaved changes. So from a draft, where we have the lock, to an unsaved changed. Or we could say, please show me the data which has not any change, so active data. So I go for all, and now I want to add something. I create a new object. I can enter here whatever I want, because within the draft we can enter inconsistent and incomplete data. So this is a feature, not a bug. We can enter data that is not consistent because we just have a draft, so it's not part of the original data. So I can, for example, simply enter the data here, and we can see that we get also other error messages. No, Jens, I missed something. I missed to
Ah,
remove this flag. So in the draft, it's not done before save, but it's done always. So we can see, okay, also the data is coming here. And if I refresh this on the right-hand side, I can see that my data I entered here is also available here. So I go in again and hope that the error messages are now correctly handled. And I can see that the data is available also here on the right-hand side. That means it's really persisted in the database, and we check that the data is merged on the UI, not only the active data, but also the change data. So this new draft here. So I don't know why the error messages do not come up here. So let's check it again. Where's my plus button? Did I press something wrong? So let's refresh the UI. So sorry, it's mentioned here in German, but we saw it quite often. So I could enter now something here.
messages don't show up. Ah,
And the messages come up, and we get immediately feedback that we entered something wrong here. So the data is not in our active persistence, which is used for analytics and all that stuff, and which can be shown by someone to someone else, but it is persisted in the shadow table in the draft. And we check that we take care that all the business logic is not only executed on the active data, but also on the draft data, and that we handle this draft orchestration correctly. And we have a complete end-to-end support now with this smart template that this draft orchestration works out of the box. So, and we can have now a device switch, as you just saw. It's independent of the browser, even the user. If Jens changes the data, I could see it here, that someone is working on that. I could not go into the edit mode, but I could see that there are drafts, that there is a draft by Jens. So I could not go ahead and proceed with my work on that. So that was it basically from the demo side. Do you have any questions related to that? Good question. The question is how can we define at a point in time that the draft table is cleaned up, so not completely, probably based on the timestamp when I entered or changed the data. We have currently the possibility to define when the log garbage collector should run. So the default is that every 20 minutes, without activities on the data, we remove the logs. And the removal of the draft is something we are currently working on. There will be some automated thing that it runs after, I don't know, 6 months or something like that. And I'm sure we will also configure that you can decide individually on a business object when the instances shall be deleted, yes. Yeah? So the question is, how can we ensure that not two persons can change the same data?
No, because what is persisted in the database or in the actual tables is a different set of data. I can come and have a draft sitting, somebody else may want to change something on that data. Where is the data from? Will the data then come from the shadow table or from the table that's persisted?
You mean which data? Which is shown to Jens if I'm in edit mode?
Right.
So if I'm changing now, for example, a specific flight meal assignment which was created, then I create a draft. If Jens goes to this list, he will see that I'm locking this flight meal assignment. Jens will see the active version of this document and not my draft, because draft is something for me, it's my draft, and Jens will see the active version, and he's not able to go into the edit mode. He's even not able to change this record if he would have an existing SAP GUI transaction, because this is now the next thing. If you have an existing SAP GUI transaction, we have to handle that it works in parallel, that you cannot have an inconsistent state.
So until the lock on your draft is released, you can't change.
Yes. So the draft is more or less my state in the session. It replaces that one, and when I'm done, then it's very similar to a classic application, yes. So other question, please? When you have a draft and someone else is working in parallel with the SAP GUI, you mean? So what we are using here are durable locks. So when I'm going into the edit mode of a flight meal assignment, then this durable lock, an enqueue server lock, is created for the original data. And this is behaves exactly the same as we would have in a normal SAP GUI transaction, a lock, a stateful lock. Yeah? And the SAP GUI transaction will check, is there a lock? And it's independent if this is a different SAP GUI session or if this is a Fiori application, it will see there is an enqueue lock set and you cannot proceed with that work. Okay, please.
I'm just wondering on the combination of this programming model, which is very focused on the UI5 side of it. Say if I've got other things on the back end, maybe a batch process that's when the flight takes off, certain things are going to be updated on that. How do those now interact with the optimistic logging that's been put on? Because essentially, if a back-end batch process has said, okay, this is now closed, it should invalidate any other optimistic logs that are currently on there that are maybe in draft mode.
So the question is, how does an update of data correlate with the e-tags, with the timestamps of other sessions which work with this data?
Right. Specifically, if it was say like UI5 application. So if you've written something back in the batch process or something else that happens there.
Yes, okay. So there are two examples where we have the optimistic lock. First one is the batch input application. We don't have exclusive locks there. And second one is the draft application after the time where we were not active with changing the data, or you might have also other examples where you need optimistic locks. And optimistic locks, from our point of view, work like that. You have a timestamp in your data, so like administrative data, a timestamp in your node, in your table. And the client checks when you do the edit, if you want to edit that one, the client checks that what is displayed is really the same thing which should be in the database by comparing the timestamps. And if now someone else has changed the data in the backend for whatever reason and however, you will see on the client, by using these smart controls, smart templates, the client will check and see, well, what I have currently displayed here is older than what is in the backend, and then the client will inform you. And also the backend, because it could also happen after you send the $badge to the backend also, of course, checks that the e-tag is valid. That means that the timestamp is not newer than the version which is currently changed.
I guess more what I'm getting at is that the back-end program is running independent of this. If it's just got an update to that table, is that automatically handling your scenario for the optimistic logging?
Yes.
Setting the timestamp, or does it have to, instead of doing an update to that table, does it have to call the business object framework itself?
So we have to distinguish what we want to achieve and the current status. What we want to achieve is that the client and that the backend are doing that automatically. Yeah. So you don't have to take care in the future for that. So because a simple timestamp comparison can be done by us if you have an appropriate timestamp in your data, of course. You can mark that as your ETEC, as your state transition ID, however it's called in our world. But if you, as currently we don't have that support for ETEC handling, we have that support for the exclusive logs, which is much more important for the draft because the ETEC is not that important in the draft scenario. But you could do that on your own by implementing it on gateway level because gateway has this ETEC support, and then, as you said, you can use some APIs to check that the data has not been changed in the meanwhile. But in future, it will be supported automatically, like the durable looks. Good question. Thank you. Other questions? Yes, please.
So we don't need to create a log object to do the enqueue and the dequeue in the program ourselves?
The logs can be created, cannot be created manually. So because creating a log is now a little bit more complex because we just do not say create a log and then we have a log for the current session because we want to have a durable log. And a durable log, which is a new concept which we offer now in our application server, is also based on enqueue. It also shows up in the enqueue transaction where we have the list of logs. But we will take care for creating the logs in our programming model because we say, yes, you created a draft, and the draft has a GUID which represents the draft, and this draft GUID is a context for the log. And if the draft does not exist anymore, the log is obsolete, or if you were inactive as an end user, then the log will also be deleted. That means the log is not bound to a session anymore, but we have a virtual assignment from the log to the draft via the draft GUID. Okay? Other questions? Yes, please.
The draft, is that created automatically as you're entering the data? Is it only saved as a draft when you've got errors in the entry?
Well, the draft, also good question, when is the draft created, basically?
Yeah.
The draft is automatically created whenever I start entering new data or if I change data, okay? So, because the client decides when a round trip should be triggered based on some semantics which you could define in the back end. So when should side effects be triggered? You can implement that on gateway level so far. And this decides when a round trip should be started. And whenever a round trip is started, so in this scenario, after each cursor switch to a new field, is the backend round trips created, and then a draft is created automatically. So by entering the first values here, so let's go, for example, for this one here, into edit mode. I go to edit. Now a draft is created by pressing edit with a GUID. Also the draft has a GUID as a primary key because we do not know that these values here are correct and unique, and they don't have to be unique for a draft because a draft is just a draft. You can enter whatever you want. And then the draft is created when I press edit or when I press plus, and then all the data is copied into the draft, and then we can simply change it here, and then the draft is updated.
For example, if you went into a correct record that was already saved in the database, you open it in it, but you don't make any changes, it's still saved in the draft.
If you go to edit mode,
So is it then locked if somebody else later then?
yes, because you say it's edit. It's like in the classic world, right? So if you open a transaction and you say edit, all the logs are created. Same here.
You can't release it as the user, you can't let that draft go?
Of course,
Unless you let it.
you can press cancel, and then the draft is deleted, is discarded. If you just go back, then the draft is kept. If you press cancel, cancel editing and discard all changes. Discard changes means delete draft. Yes, please.
One other question. When you create your business object there to handle the lifecycle methods there, if you've created a stacked CDS view, are you able to have business objects at multiple levels of that stack, and do they inherit from each other?
Good question. No, it's not possible. Question was, is it possible now with CDS we can have view stacking? Is it now possible to implement a business object on each level? No, we force or we rely on consistent modeling, which means for us you have a business object representing the normalized data model. Yeah, so basically using a CDS view here is maybe also not the best solution you can find in order to define a business object, but we just have views, so we have to do it like that way. The business object, the lowest level, however that is implemented under the hood. And then we say we can have one more layer, which I have not shown here, which we call consumption view, because it's not always as simple as I have shown it here, because you just expose a business object, the complete one here. But as I said, you want to have role-based applications. You just want to have a projection of your business object. And you might want to add specific UI annotations for each UI and not one time for the business object, then each UI, every UI looks the same. So therefore, we have the business object and one more layer, which is the consumption view.
So really the business objects implemented at the lowest layer,
Yes.
and the consumption ones just become your
Exactly, and the consumption view is on top, and that was it. We have also a slide here, which perfectly, hopefully, describes that one. So slide 38. We have to design our persistency, which is a depict table. And then we have CDS views representing the business object. And then we have, optionally, the consumption views, which overrule somehow the business object, like which fields should not be displayed, which associations should not be displayed, which actions should be ignored, how should the UI annotations for the service look like, which specific value help do I want to have, and things like that, renaming. And only this layering is from our point of view supported, because otherwise we would implement something that even a database cannot support if we have updatable views. That's basically not possible. Technically we have a view, but from conceptual point of view it's not a view, it's a business object.
So in a model where you have, say, multiple tables that need to be updated as part of the same transaction, say the header table and the detail table, if you had to model it that way, you would have two separate views, each with a business object on that table, or you somehow combine them into a business object that represents the association.
Yes, question is, what about if I have a model with several nodes, a business object with several nodes? A CDS view here is on a business object level, but does not represent the business object, but more the business object node. Just the root node also represents the business object. But if I have additional views, I could add those views via associations, and I have to mark these associations as compositions. And then we take care that this works out of the box. So, for example, if I say the carrier is a sub-node of the flight meal assignment, so that doesn't make sense, of course, but if this would be now some details for the assignment, I could add here a new annotation, object model composition, how's it called, association, type, to composition root, and on carrier level I would have to define the parent and so on. So then we create several nodes in the BOPF framework. Then we would see here also the hierarchy in the outline, that there is a subnode, and then we can attach business logic also to this node. Yeah, welcome. Yes, please. So, sorry, didn't quite get the question.
You have described multiple, combinations here as a view and
Yes.
operators, right? Use of business
Yes.
object. Do you have a website or?
So you're asking basically for documentation, right? For our end-to-end scenarios? You are asking for documentation for our scenarios? Yeah. So good question. If you search in the internet simply for Fiori, ABAP, programming model, you find our documentation in the help portal. So this you can also do from your own device. You find the newest documentation which is available, which is related to our current delivery. So draft is obviously not delivered and therefore not documented publicly, but we can see here, for example, this batch input application. You can see here getting started, how you get started with CDS, building end-to-end application. You can find here some details. It's a short introduction. You find some overview material, and you can see also the different steps which you need to perform in order to get a first scenario running, how to define a CDS view, how to create an OData service, how to use the web ID for the smart templates. And then we have for the development, real development scenarios, separate sections here where we have an end-to-end documentation from the database table up to the user interface, with the focus, of course, on the ABAP backend, but completely end-to-end documented. And of course, we also have here references and common documentation, so not guides, but detailed documentation, for example, how to create a value help, how to define text elements, how to enable fuzzy search and all that stuff. So everything which is delivered from our side is very well documented in the help portal as well as in Eclipse. So you can also access this documentation within Eclipse. Okay. Other questions? So otherwise, I would be very happy if you could fill out the survey. I think we don't go into detail for this. We discussed that already. The key message is that we now have solved all the requirements that we introduced via the new product qualities, and the availability of these features we just saw is that the batch input application is available with 751, and the draft scenario shall be available with SP1 751 SP1. So of course, disclaimer here, it's not guaranteed, but that's our plan that we will have it with SP1. So I think 751 SP0, so the release shall be available within the next days, or is already available, I'm not sure about that, and SP1 beginning of next year, probably. Okay, then if there are no more questions, so I would be happy to get feedback from you for this presentation, for this demo, and enjoy the TechEd and have a good trip back. Thank you very much.